we are a better, well-oiled machine as we go through these steps and the budget process. So Eric, I will let you take over and we'll rock and roll today.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. I think I gave everyone up here a copy of this. There's probably enough if department heads want a copy of this PowerPoint. This relates to Senate Bill 1, which will affect all of you. If you want one, come up and get it. If you just want to look on the screen, that's fine as well. We can also provide this to Brandy after the meeting if you guys want it electronically. If Nicole, you want to send that PowerPoint to Brandy. Okay. A couple of things today. I know we have 2 hours. I'll keep it open as you guys have questions. I know this is going through it the second time, so you guys probably have a lot more questions than you had the first time when it was all brand new. A couple of housekeeping items. Brandy's sending some out now. We're also providing some additional ones. Each department is going to get your worksheet that you're used to seeing last year. Excel based. If you want it in PDF, we can give you a PDF too, but Excel, I don't care if you handwrite on it or you fill out the Excel. The Excel's easier if you go in and actually put the numbers in the green column, just like last year. And Nicole, if you want to pull one of those up while I'm talking, I don't care which department. But very similar to historical, it's going to give you a 3-year trend line by line on your expenses. It's going to give you a green column that you fill out, and it's going to give you over to the side some areas you can put some notes in there. I know it's just small up on the screen, but this is the general fund, which will be broken down by department. 22 through 24 on the left-hand side. Scroll back up so I can see the top. Your 2025 budget, your 2026 budget, and then it's giving you dollar changes and percentage changes. So if you use this in Excel, it'll automatically fill those out for you. That's why I'd suggest you do it there because it'll give you some real-time feedback. After you submit all those, we'll roll them all up again, provide you the revenue versus expense. So then we can look department by department. Do we have any funding shortfalls, et cetera, just operationally? All of you have already provided your capital plans, but we'll give that to you as well so you can see the capital number. And if you, general's not a good one, probably, Nicole, but if you look at, well, general will have some capital. Yep. There you can see the general capital plan, but keep in mind, if you go to, well, now we're on streets or general, just one. If you look at the left-hand column though, this gives you the department. But keep in mind, in the interviews we already did earlier, in the middle column, funding source, that is where we're kind of looking at what funds have which dollars. We've worked with the mayor very closely. Don't worry so much about that fund. What I'm really worried about are the things that your department put on the list in here, and are the dollar amounts and the timing correct? Okay, so I use an example why it's on the screen. Let's use IT server upgrade phased in. Funding source still to be determined, but $225,000 in 26, $225,000 in 27. What I'm worried about is that the right dollar amount? Are those the years discussed when you guys all met with the mayor as well? Is this the plan that was landed upon? Sometimes we get numbers wrong. Sometimes numbers change. Sometimes you guys get better information. So do scrub it, but those should all be very, very close because this is, I think, about the third time we went through these plans. And then that ties back, if you'll show Nicole one of these in the actual budget lines, how capital pulls back. So you're highlighting, general mayor, $1,500. That's probably an easy one to go show them. So there you'll see in orange, other capital outlays, $1,500 as a budget. Okay, so those numbers should tie back. Now, in the past, some of you guys have had like, well, sometimes I have an allowance here or I round up or whatever. Talk through with that with the mayor, finance committee. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. I just want to have notes to that because what I'm really trying to do is tie this detail back to your 400 level budget line items. That makes it much, much easier for Lori when she has to put it into Gateway at the end of all this. Any questions on this process? I think is there anybody new that hasn't went through this yet? Any questions, or is this just totally Totally new. Okay. If you have questions, reach out to Nicole Amber or I on it. It's pretty intuitive once you get started with it. The revenue side as well. That's what I'm going to talk to a little bit about here as we go through the majority of this Senate Bill 1 discussion. And that's the PowerPoint. Again, if you want to pull that up, Nicole, let's start having a Senate Bill 1 discussion. All right. So has everyone heard Senate Bill 1, SEA 1, called different things? You guys are at least, or this is on your radar. So I'm going to go through generically some of the impacts of this, but do pay attention to it, because even though these are high level and maybe not specific to your department right now, I want you to get an understanding for the next 6 years. There could be some legislative changes, but why you're going to see in our reports this year some changes in revenue trends. Okay. And the multi-year plan, what I'll refer to as our CFP, multi-year financial plan, I've been through it once. After we scrub your worksheets, it'll pretty much be in complete form. You will start to see some of these revenue hits. And primarily there's two that you need to be worried about. I mean, there's more than two, but the two that'll probably affect most of you are property tax. And the reason it will affect property tax is as assessed values don't raise as fast due to some different credits or even flatline, depending on what the economy does, that will push your tax rate up, which will push more people to the caps, which then results in a lower net levy. And when I say lower net levy, you're likely still going to get additional revenues. It just won't be as much additional revenue year over year, likely. Does that make sense? The second piece is in 2028, the income tax changes that I'll get into some pretty good details on and actually show you guys some calculations that our team's done on potential reductions in income tax. That doesn't start until 2028. All right. So Nicole, you want to go through the slides? All right. So setting the scene, here's a timeline of how this stuff gets enacted. I'm not going to read every single one of these to you guys. But starting in 2025, so for next year's budget, the MLGQ, so max levy growth quotient, is capped at 4%. That's not new. It's just an extension of what was already happened. So MLGQ, that's how much the city's total property tax gross goes up from year to year. So that's pre-tax caps, pre-circuit breaker. If you didn't have it artificially capped, you'd be above 5%. Same as the last 2 years. Okay. So that's one area right away. Yes, you're getting additional revenue, but not as much as you otherwise would have gotten. There's some minor changes with county council lit adoption and some controlled project thresholds. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot. I know the mayor and Greg and our team have been talking through some of those. Doesn't necessarily affect you guys right now, but you'll see the income tax issue gets more prevalent as we get out to 2028. Starting in 26, so for this budget year, next year's assessed value years, that's year one of the phasing in of some of these changes I'm going to show you in detail on future slides. That phase in is over 6 years, so it goes through 2031. Okay, so that's giving some additional deductions and credits to certain property value levels. And everybody's familiar with like the 1%, 2%, 3% when I talk about that. 1% is residential's properties, home, not rentals. 2% is rentals, agricultural, multi-unit facilities, and then 3 is industrial and a couple other things that fall into that 3%. That's the tax cap. All right, when I talk about it, so when I say 1% properties, residentials, those are people that when they get their tax bill, they're capped at 1% of their gross assessed value. Okay. When I say a 2% property, think rental property. That's the most common 2%. They are capped at 2% of their gross assessed value. So what that means in reality is if I'm a $100,000 residential property assessed at $100,000, my tax bill, a few caveats, will be $1,000 or less. If my tax bill was calculated based on all the tax rates of the city, the school, the county, the airport, and it was supposed to be $1,100, I still only pay my $1,000. That $100 is what I keep referring to as circuit breaker or tax cap loss. If I own a rental property same $100,000 assessment. Now I'm capped at 2% because I'm a 2% property value. Now my tax bill can't be more than $2,000 on that. But keep in mind, as a rental property owner, I don't get like the homestead deduction and all of those things. So typically my property tax is higher, which is why they're at a higher cap. Does that make sense to everybody? So when I say 1%, 2%, 3%, just I want you to be thinking in those terms. You'll see 27, same phase in, some of the lit issues. 2028, that is the first year under the new lit structure. I fully expect there's going to be changes to this between now and 2028, but finance council, mayor, we need to plan for what's in law right now. Not what we think will be in law, but there likely will be some changes here. And then 29, 30, 31, that's just the continued phasing in of these changes to property taxes. But if we go to slide 4, I'll show you what this means, this phase in that I keep talking about. All right, so on slide 4, this shows you 2025 through 2031. Right now, the standard deduction. So for a homestead residential property, $48,000 is the standard deduction. You'll see that phasing out through 2031. Okay, so if that was the only property tax deduction available to homesteads, think of it this way: my house is assessed at $100,000. Right off the top, I get a $48,000 deduction. So I pay taxes on $52,000 of net assessed value. Okay. The city's tax rate is based on the $52,000 of net assessed value. Does that make sense? So as those credits phase out, that assessed value is going to come up. Tax rates would come down if it was in a vacuum, and the property owner would pay more because their net assessed value would be higher. But the flip side of that coin is supplemental homestead deduction. That's a percentage. Right now, 37%. That is going to phase in, going higher to almost 67%. Okay, so very simplistically, we're phasing out the standard fixed deduction. We're increasing the percentage-based supplemental homestead deduction over 6 years. Okay. There's some other notes here on the supplemental homestead, the lesser of 300 or 10%. There's a 65 and over credit, and there's a disabled homeowner credit that's going in. Those are not huge amounts, but they will affect the end result a little bit. So what does this mean in practice? Go to slide 5. Now you'll start to see why you're likely going to see some revenue impacts when this becomes reality. This is the average medium home in the entire state of Indiana is an assessed value, gross assessed value of $240,000. Okay, I'm going to show you a $100,000 home here in a second. So what we're showing here on line 1 is in a vacuum. So saying that assessed value doesn't go up or down over 6 years. We're just doing it as this point in time. Now, in reality, that assessed value is likely going to go up, but we're just doing this as a static change to show you the impacts. That standard deduction phases out over the 6 years. That percentage supplemental increases over the 6 years and comes down to a net assessed value. Okay, so that $240,000 home, right now that homeowner pays tax on $120,000. By year 6, that same valued home, they'd pay taxes on $80,000. Okay, so that's the property tax relief that you see. Now, in reality, that homeowner is probably going to see their assessed value go up over that period of time, but we can make any assumption we want here. I'm just trying to show you today the impacts. Okay, so what that means is, in a vacuum, the net assessed value that your tax rates are based on is going to go down in this, or rise slower than it otherwise would have as these come into effect. Okay, for this level of homeowner. That will raise the tax rate, which will push more people to circuit breaker, which that is where you see revenue loss. It's starting to make sense now? You can see then the bottom line number. This is kind of the property tax relief that homeowner is seeing. Okay, so good for the homeowner, not great on the revenue side for revenue generated for the city. Now look at it on the next slide, $100,000 home. Okay, you'll see why I chose a $100,000 home here in a second. Same credits, 48,000, 33%. Right now, that $100,000 homeowner pays property tax, and their tax bill is calculated on $32,500 of net assessed value. Okay. In year 6, it's almost exactly the same. Okay. So this is like math 101, right? As we go from a fixed fee credit or deduction to a percentage based that's heavier weighted, higher value homes get more relief. Lower valued homes get less relief. Okay. Makes sense to everybody? So your mix of like, don't worry about the homeowner right now. Worry about your budget, your revenue, the city's revenue. The mix of your property classes matters considerably to how much this will impact the city. Okay. If you have a lot of 150 and less valued homes, not as big of an impact to you guys. If you have a lot of expensive homes, bigger potential revenue loss to you all because it's lowering those values for the calculations. Does that make sense? We haven't even got into the commercial stuff yet. Any questions so far? I know I'm getting very wonky here, but is this making sense to everybody so far? Okay. So now let's go to the next property class that's in Senate Bill 1. This is the 2%. Okay, so this, think agricultural, non-homestead residential, so basically second homes and rentals primarily, and long-term care facilities. This property tax has not had a deduction historically. So my rental property is worth $100,000. I pay tax on $100,000. I don't get those credits that I talked about because it's not a homestead. It's not my primary home. There will be a phase in now to a 33% credit on this level of property. Okay. So now my $100,000 rental that I'm paying tax on $100,000 by year 6, if that property value didn't change at all, I'm now paying property tax on $67,000 for that same home. Same math, right? Lowers the net assessed value, raises the tax rate, pushes more people to tax cap, results in revenue loss for you. Making sense? And then the third leg of this stool from the property tax relief component is business personal property tax, okay? So right now there's a de minimis exemption, meaning I have a store and I have $80,000 of personal property. I have a machine or some inventory, whatever it may be. I don't even have to file a business personal property tax return because I'm below the de minimis exception. That exception is raising to $2 million by 2027. So you'll have, I think AIM did an analysis of this. I think that's like over 90% of business personal property tax payers in the state will fall below that exemption, which sounds really bad at first. But the large companies, the ones with, your metal fabricators, all that kind of stuff that you guys have, they're not going to be below that. Okay. So I look at this as, yes, there's going to be some revenue loss here, but it's also cutting out the need for a lot of like mom and pop type companies of filing business personal property tax returns now. But there will be revenue loss from this. Okay. Because again, you're basically taking $2 million out of the equation in future years for each business. That's going to be capped again at 4%. It's been that way for the last few years. We estimate, had that cap not existed, you probably would have had about a 5.6% increase. So this is that levy increase. So we're getting $5 million in levy for the whole city property taxes this year, gross before tax caps. It would have went up 5.6%. It'll only go up 4% because of the cap. Same issue you guys have had the last few years. This is statewide, not just specific to Auburn. The change that's not really fully understood yet is starting with the next budget year, so in the 2027 budget years, the MLGQ is going to be more geographically or regionally based on economic indicators. Okay, so it's kind of like a black box. The way I interpret this until we get better data is you live in Indianapolis area, donut communities, Carmel, Fishers, Zionsville, you're pulling in economic characteristics from that. Your growth quotient is probably going to be higher because it's a faster growing economy. You're in Southwest Indiana or Southeast Indiana, very rural, not a ton of job growth, not a lot of economic indicators probably don't look quite as great, you're going to have a lower growth quotient. So it's going to be geographically based in future years. Okay. You guys being close to Fort Wayne probably will be in decent shape, I would say. But until we get better data on this, I would just plan on, well, this is my opinion. They didn't, this is a property tax relief bill. They didn't do this. So your max levy growth quotient is going to be higher than it would have been. It's likely going to be a little bit less than you typically would have relied on. Any questions on that? This one will be interesting how it shakes out, because I'm not even sure how this is going to create a lot of additional work for the state. Income tax. Okay, we're going to switch to this on slide 10. This is the 2028 start, okay, that I expect changes to. But what I want you to focus on here is you guys are a city that's above 3,500 population, so you'll qualify for the far right column. Okay, municipalities population at least 3,500. And this is very important for the council to hear. If nothing changes in 2027, effective for 2028, you will have the ability to adopt your own income tax rate for the city, up to 1.2%. And I'll actually show you, Greg's team did some calculations already and provided them on what this could mean. The county also has the ability to do up to 1.2%. Two separate lits. If you live in Auburn, you would pay both. Okay. Generating money for Auburn and generating money for the county. I'm not going to worry about the less than 3,500 population, because that's not you all, but for other cities or towns in the county that are there, they don't have that option. They basically get a piece of the counties if the county gives it to them. Okay. But you guys will kind of own your own destiny, so to speak, but you are capped at 1.2%. What that means is you're going to have to take a vote, and you're going to have to raise income taxes. Well, you're going to have to institute an income tax. You guys can decide how the public will perceive that, but the city is going to have its own income tax in that case, and the county will do something independently of you all. Okay. Many of you, just so you understand income tax, I'm talking that many of you get some piece of that. If you're a department in the general fund gets certified shares, which is income tax. Okay, that's a revenue line you guys all share in the general fund. Public safety lit, that is an income tax. Seated is an income tax. So a lot of you guys and ladies in your capital plans, you may have seated fund something for you in the future. That is an income tax. The other interesting part of this legislation is nothing changes. Those are three separate funds, right? Part of income tax goes to general, part of income tax goes to public safety lit, part of income tax goes to seated. 2028, seated no longer gets any money. Public safety lit no longer gets any money. That whole, let's say you go to the max 1.2%, that whole 1.2% goes to the general fund. Okay. So I'll take police and fire because that's the easiest one right now, where you have public safety lit only can go for you guys, and you guys are the only two that can spend out of there. That'll be embedded into the general fund in future years. So if you're doing kind of thinking through, well, what does this look like? Eventually you're going to spend down all your money in seat it and all your money in public safety lit, and then you're going to have to move those costs to the general fund, because that's who's getting the money at that point.
Should we start phasing that in the next 2 years instead of trying to do it all in 2020?
When we have the 5-year plan, we're going to talk about that. And like I said, I've reviewed it once. It'll probably be done here in another week, 10 days. And I want to go through that with the mayor, because your cash balances in public safety lit and seated are very healthy. And right now, the way the legislation is, like, you can't take that public safety lit money, the few $1 million that's sitting there, and say, well, we're just going to move that to general and solve the problem now. One strategy that I'm going to suggest you consider is, like, you keep your costs there until you run that dry, and then you have to start moving, or, maybe it's the last year or 2 years, you move cost over to general, but you have to spend that money anyway by its legal purpose. So there's no reason to, like, sit there and hold the public safety lit fund open longer than you have to. It'll just stop getting money.
So wouldn't it also involve it with SB1 that, so basically 2026, everything that's going into the lit now, public safety, the county can take all for 2026. Is that correct?
The county can take, I think, up to 75%. I'll have to go back and read that. Yeah, I think it's 75% of
So
it.
they dropped it from the 100, they can take everything.
I have to go back and reread that to double check that.
That changed so.
Yes.
So that was a big one we talked about. It was going to be crucial for us with ours because right now about 28% of our budget is coming out late. So that's a huge.
Yep. On the public safety side, this will be the biggest hit.
The negotiation when they when counties were supposed to be in charge of all of the tax, the local income tax, and they may or may not give it to the local cities and towns. That might have been part of the negotiations to lower that. I can't remember exactly.
And I'll have to also look because that may have gotten restricted, Chief, to also only the 3,500 and below populations.
That was part of that negotiation.
I'm about 80% sure that was how it shook out. I don't think you guys will run that risk because you're a larger municipality. I think it's only the 35 and below that could be an issue for in 26. Any other question? I'm not going to read this whole table. There's also some fire. Well, I guess fire protection. You guys have talked about fire protection in the past. There is a 0.4% cap there. Most fire territories that I'm seeing are somewhere in that 0.3 to mid 0.4s. So this could be an issue potentially for fire territories in the future. So just keep it simple. If you have your whole fire levy, because remember the fire territory is separate of the city levy, okay? If that's generating a 0.44 tax rate or 0.44, you're going to lose 0.04 of that. You're going to be capped at 0.4, okay? So where this could be an issue is think of it this way. All these assessment changes, if that starts to lower net assessed value, that's going to push up your tax rate. Right? So that could become an issue over time. If you can't cut service to stay within that 0.4, then you start talking about like the discussion we had on the fire truck a year or two ago. You have to start shifting some cost out of the fire territory to the city, which then is, not keeping the mix correct of people in the county actually paying for the full share of fire cost. Does that make sense? Because then only city residents are paying for it. Yes.
So you're saying in summary that the income tax we're receiving from the county is going to disappear, and if we don't adopt the city income tax rate, then we'll be losing money after 2 years.
Yeah, you guys generate over $5 million in income tax. If you said, hey, we're not doing any income tax rate as a city, you would lose $5 million revenue.
And then on the fire protection, currently, just put this in perspective of what Eric mentioned, we're at 46, just over 46% now. So we are going to see a loss there when they implement that 40%. Yep. So,
and you'll likely see it. I want to say it'll get worse, but I think at best it stays level at that because remember, the fire territory is going to get impacted by these tax changes too, which will affect the assessed value growth going forward. I think that's a sticking point I want you all to have in your mind. Like, this is not lowering property tax rates. It's likely going to increase property tax rates. It's lowering net assessed values on properties. Okay. So anything that's a rate capped fund, like the fire territory new legislation or CCD, remember your CCD funds capped at 0.05. It's going to negatively affect those because your assessed value, I'm not saying your assessed value is going to go down because you're growing, so you may kind of offset some of this, but your assessed value is not going to grow near as fast as it would have because of the new deduction and credit phase in and business personal property tax phase in. Does that make sense? So the same issue that you just raised, Mayor, will be an issue for your CCD fund too. Page 11 just talks about the timing. This is important, I think, for the council on the lit ordinances. I don't want to get totally into a sidebar on this, but I think this is a thought for another day. I think y'all work pretty well with the county, so hopefully this gets coordinated, but there's going to be some timing to this, right? As this gets into the press and who takes action and who adopts what, it could be seen, I'm just saying hypothetically, who adopts their income tax first and then who looks like an income tax increase to that, because keep in mind, Auburn citizens would pay both of those, right? Now, if you're out in the county, it's just one income tax, but you're going to be paying, say you both go to the max, you're going to be paying the 1.2% to both entities. So I think there does definitely need to be some coordination and some public relations around that. Referendum, I'm not going to get too much into this because this is really project based. We'll talk about a little bit later, and Greg's actually going to be on the phone. A lot of and this is not utility, okay? This is property tax projects. So think of like when you did your geo bond, things like that. Like this is where this comes into effect. So it's not really going to be in you guys' lives too much. But the caps of those project sizes before it has to go on the ballot have been reduced, okay? So just keep in mind, if there's larger projects that property taxes or income taxes are going to help fund, we have to be very careful to keep it either under referendum thresholds or under controlled project thresholds. Controlled project's not a big deal. That's just more work for Zach and the attorneys to kind of have a few more steps. Referendum potentially does become an issue because then it has to go on the ballot and get voted on to be able to do it. This will really affect schools and some cities and towns that are a little bit more debt laden than Auburn is. Road funding, I think this is important. Daryl, you guys and streets. So this will decrease some of the local match requirements, 25 to 20 for counties and municipalities, smaller municipalities. So you guys are above the 10, won't affect you guys. Wheel tax adoption is not required for CCMG funds. However, there's going to be an incentive for local units to adopt wheel taxes. The incentive, the way I understand the incentive, and I'll explain this in my terms because I have to dumb it down and get out all the math, is kind of two buckets of CCMG. And once the first bucket is expended with all the matches, let's say there's, I'm gonna make these numbers up, say there's 30 million in bucket 2 left over. Getting in line for bucket 2 will depend on if you have a wheel tax or not. If you don't have a wheel tax, you'll be at the bottom of that list. So you probably never will. There's enough municipalities and counties now, you'll probably never get in bucket 2. So I would give this to the council. Historically, county or cities above 10,000, you can adopt your own wheel tax. So just say the city for now. Don't worry about what the county does. If you want to maximize CCMG going forward, you need to have a wheel tax. Now that's another tax increase that you have to vote on. The second piece to that, though, is you guys are financially very, very good shape, have been for years. I think a wheel tax is something you just want to have on your radar as potentially down the line as a revenue fix, because a wheel tax would bring additional revenues into your MVH fund, offset reliance on property tax that you could then shift property tax from MVH to general or another department. I don't think you guys need to do that now, but I want you to recognize engineering, streets, you're likely not going to get as big of CCMG distributions in the future without a wheel tax. Questions on that?
I guess one more thing there is LTAP had a nice presentation last night on and wheel tax is basically to the city versus CCMG, which is subjected to applying grant. And then there's the formula of if you do have a wheel tax to get that, the road mileage distribution, then that is deducted from what you're eligible for CCMG. So say we get 100,000 distributed, and there's up to $1 million we can apply for, and we can only apply for 900,000. It subtracts that 100.
Yeah, I have a question. So is the wheel tax a set rate, or can you go in with the wheel tax at a teeny tiny little rate?
You can have it below, there's a max rate. I think the max on,
In a minimum.
yeah, in a minimum, I think the minimum's 5 and the max is 25 on like a commuter vehicle, I believe, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, there's different rates for the classification. of
Yeah.
vehicle, whether it's a car versus a semi-truck.
Yeah. I'm almost positive it's 5 is the minimum, 25 for the residential car or commuter vehicle.
Dollars and not percent.
Dollars. So you go in, you register your car, you pay all your fees, all that regular. There would be an additional $25, up to $25 for Auburn wheel tax. And then you guys get all of that money back to your MBH fund.
Is DeKalb County doing
Yeah. They don't have one now. I think have they voted on it yet?
No.
But keep in mind, DeKalb County does one. You guys will get a share of that. You can still have your own
Mhm.
on top of that.
But we're paying both.
But yeah, you're paying both.
And like, because Jen Sharkey came and did a presentation and it was great. And one of the things that they were talking about was CCMG dollars. If you don't have the wheel tax passed, it almost is a deduction to what you could get, because they want that done at the local level.
So again, this is just my opinion, but doing this long enough, I think what you're going to see is CCMG, great program, great PR for the legislature, getting road miles, pavement down, all of that, getting new roads. That's good for everybody, right? They've now gotten that bump from it. It's kind of how many years old. The next thing that comes along of like, well, how do we fund this initiative and get another good PR bump? Typically, you'll see those older initiatives start to phase out. Well, what is this doing? It's creating a revenue source that's locally generated as that phases out. Now you don't have to rely on CCMG. I think that's what this play is. It's just a multi-year phase out of CCMG.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions. Is the $1 million still going to be the max for community crossings?
The last I heard, I don't know if they've
They haven't
changed.
announced.
Yeah.
They don't know the uncertain.
Yeah.
And then the funding, the dollars that go into community crossings, where does that come from? Is that going to be in jeopardy? Like the overall
The state funding,
bucket?
the state funding or your local funding?
The money that goes into community crossings, the state,
It's primarily gas tax.
that's not in jeopardy of.
Hopefully not. They've already went through the pain of instituting it. Hopefully they're not going to take it back now.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that? 14, council, Lori, more for you guys. I would say this is if I'm on my soapbox for 30 seconds, this is the small thing, but to me, the dumbest thing that's in this bill. If I can say that. I guess there's no representatives here or newspaper, hopefully. The hardest thing to deal with in the bill, let me put it that way, not dumbest, the hardest thing to deal with, that's small. Your current budget process is at the top, public hearing, budget adoption, DLGF approval. Your new process in 29 is adding an additional public hearing to this, which why I said, and I was too harsh, probably was dumbest, the hardest thing to deal with. What this will do for Lori's office is it moves up your budget timeline a couple of weeks. And think how, when you guys are pretty proactive in everything you do, you guys don't have a whole lot of time to spare usually when you get through your regular council meetings. So it's either going to result in you having special meetings to meet these deadlines, or you're going to have to move your whole budget process up a minimum of 2 weeks, if not a month. Think of communities that only meet once a month. This will move your whole process up a month. Okay. For an extra public hearing that I would say, do you guys get a lot of people show up to your budget public hearing? Not usually. Adding another one, you're going to get more people to show up. I don't know that that's going to matter. So Lori, that comment's for you. Be planning for this, that if something doesn't, and this is, I think, a big one too, that Ames trying to lobby for, like, hey, let's not put additional red tape and steps into this, because it's only going to make clerk treasurers and CFO types lives harder. All right, fire territories. We already talked about this. The 40-cent cap. as the mayor said, I think you guys were at 45 or 46 this last year. I think our estimates have that coming down slightly in FY 26 or calendar year 20 or budget year 26. But you'll still, as this gets phased in or put into place, either have to shift some cost or deal with that revenue loss. If you remember in last year's 5-year plan, and the picture is still the same, the one that I just reviewed, fire is one because of potentially capital needs and new hiring needs that you guys have some budget deficits already in there. So this is going to be a little bit difficult to deal with on you guys' end. And again, just for the council to remember, yes, you're healthy in the fire territory too, but you're healthy in the city. You may have some spots in the city like CCD, seated, et cetera, general fund that could help out fire, but then you're shifting a cost from being shared across your fire territory, which includes the county, to really being burdened by the city residents only in that. So it's not a super easy fix in this issue. Miscellaneous provisions. You guys did qualify for one of these a few years ago, 3-year levy growth excess levy appeals. So if you guys remember, and Lori, I think you were here when this happened. I can't remember how many years ago this hit, but if you're a fast growing community, you can do an appeal to the state that, hey, we're growing fast. We need more resources to support our growing residential commercial base, more firefighters, police officers, roads, et cetera. We can get a higher growth quotient. So that 4%, we can actually get higher above that on our property tax. That appeal process goes away in this. So not that you guys got this every year, but you have gotten it in the past. All right. So now we get into, so what does all this mean? And again, I don't want it to be, always sound too negative or too dire, right? I mean, the intent of this was property tax relief for the taxpayer. Now it's incumbent on you all in the city and us to figure out, okay, how do we deal with this? Because it is going to affect our revenue streams, okay? So on slide 18, the recommendations, and you guys already are doing several of these, you're ahead of the curve, I would say. One, when I say crisis preparation, what I'm saying there is, no one's really going to know how impactful this is till the impacts start happening. Okay. You can have all the estimates. We're working on additional estimates. I think the mayor's seen like LSA, Legislative Service Agency. They've done estimates on what this means for property tax impacts over the next 3 years. One issue with that is this is a 6-year phase in. So what happens in years 4, 5, and 6? Well, if you extend the LSA numbers, they get worse in year 3. So they're probably getting worse in year 4 and 5 and 6. And we're actually working on a model that will do just that. So we'll be able to look at DeKalb County. We'll be able to look at Auburn specifically, apply these phases in. And then we can apply also factors for like, well, what do we think if assessed values keep trending? You guys have been trending at 5, 6, 7%. If that keeps happening, is there really that much revenue loss? Because now you have growth in assessed value offsetting some of these phases in of deductions and credits, right? So maybe it's not as bad. The flip side too is you got to factor in the income tax changes, right? And I'll show you that in a little bit. I do think you guys probably will lose a little bit of income tax even if you go to the max in this. So when I say crisis preparation, it's understanding the levers that are going to move, having a model set up that as those levers do move, you guys can react fairly proactively. But then also kind of remembering, and has anybody been in the budgeting process since 2010? Does anybody go back that far, like in the city budget side of this? So you guys didn't probably, I guess, have to live dealing with the financials when circuit breaker tax caps originally came in. But why I go back to that is when that was instituted in 2008 and fully effective starting in 2010, most of the modeling at that time, we were in a very fast growing economy, started to fall off in the early 2010s, if you remember, went through a downturn. So we saw heavier impacts than were expected at that time from tax cap losses. What that took then was a few years as there was legislative fixes to that, primarily through giving county and city options on things like income tax, public safety lit, things like that came out of it. Okay, we're going to give you lifelines. Like, we understand you can't, I use Goshen, Indiana a lot because they're one of our clients. They were losing like 35, 40% of their revenue to tax caps. Okay, at that time, because they were, had so many people over the maximums, starting to get lifelines to offset some of that revenue loss. I'm not saying this is going to be an exact duplicate. What I'm saying is, let's learn a lesson from that until you start getting into the actual results of this and the phasing in and what are property values doing, et cetera, you never are going to know the exact impacts. You're going to have to rely on some cash reserves. You're going to have to be very proactive through this 6 years, kind of turning the ship, if you will, and having that crisis plan in place. Because that may mean at the administrative and council level, hey, if our revenue loss in 27 is 3 times what Baker Tilly thought it was going to be, okay, now we're at a point in our budget's already adopted, right? We adopted our budget 6 months ago. Are we going to do some appropriation reductions and reduce spending mid-year, or are we going to rely on cash reserves? Because you have cash reserves, but you can't rely on them forever, right? Those are the types of decisions I think you're going to face as you go through this. The second piece is put your date on trial, interrogate the story. We're always very conservative in these. You guys have seen those in our 5-year plans. We'll do the same thing with these property tax modeling that we're building out. We can do an assumption. What if for the next 6 years your property taxes keep growing your tax base keeps growing at 6%? Okay, what's that outcome? Let's be prepared for it. We can also do a worst case. What happens if economically we fall off a cliff? No one wants to build new houses in Auburn, whatever it may be, and we flatline or go up 1% a year. What does that do? Okay, and then you guys have to be strategic in planning for both ends of that, because that's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars shift. Does that make sense? And then it also gets into the decision-making piece, obviously, because now it gets to council of, what do we do with income taxes? What do we do with our fire territory rate once it's capped? What do we do if there's legislative changes in the future that give you more control locally, but you have to take the action to institute those revenue sources? One that you have right now that's an easy one is like fines, fees, permits. As this puts more pressure on you locally, I'm just using one as an easy example. I'm not saying to do this, but your building permits, do you increase those 20, 30% to generate more revenue? Because now, again, that's offsetting some of this loss. Those are the decision-making pieces you guys are going to have to wrestle with. Slide 19, just continuing that theme. So you have both ends of the spectrum, and I always oversimplify stuff, because when you break this down, it's a ton of data, but when you break it all down, it really is some simple decisions, right? It's revenue and expenditures. That's your budget all day long. You're going to be capped, or your hands are tied on a lot of revenue side things. On expenditures, depending on the department, if you're going to make major shifts in your expenditure side to this, material shifts, like they're going to change to the bottom line, you're really talking personnel and you're talking capital. Some departments like public safety, much more heavily weighted probably on personnel. Some other departments probably heavier weighted on capital. You're not going to change your financial trajectory cutting out supplies spending. It's personnel, benefits, capital. Okay. So the easiest one's obviously capital, but if these are truly needs that are in that slide, like that Nicole showed earlier, and I know the mayor's met with all of you guys individually, we've went through these, we've even done reductions already. Some of that just becomes kicking the can down the road then, right? I mean, it's like, hey, we've needed new sidewalks for years. We need a new bridge here. We need to do paving on these streets. That's the kick the can down the road kind of mentality that, yeah, it balances your budget in these years, but at some point you got to pay up on it, right? And you've even seen some of this, I think, here in the last few years in your utilities and some of your other projects that you're doing. Some of that is just catch up from years and years and years and years. When you do that all at once, what's it do? Well, it increases your rates, it draws down your cash balances, things of that nature. Okay. Personnel, obviously, are dealing with people's lives, longevity, etc. A lot of communities that we're having these discussions with are talking about, and they're already doing analyses of, okay, are there certain positions that we have people that will retire in the next few years? Do we have to replace all of those? So instead of cutting personnel, it's a replacement strategy and a succession strategy. I would encourage you all to be thinking on that. Like, hey, if there's a position that we maybe don't need to fill, or we can take it to a part-time, or it becomes, instead of a higher level, down to an entry level, something of that nature, that's where you're going to see some cost savings. Okay. Questions on that? And I would just say, again, you guys are very financially sound with your cash reserves, but this isn't an issue. Like, use the succession planning as an example. You only have certain opportunities to do that, right? I mean, it's when somebody retires. So if you don't start addressing it now, you may get yourself into a cycle that if you have to address it 5 years from now, you don't have the opportunity, right? Because nobody's retiring at that point. Does that make sense? So have these conversations, be looking at your personnel on the expense side. Fiscal sustainability planning, slide 20. This is where you guys are ahead of the curve. This is a presentation we're giving to many of our clients. So short term, 1 to 2 years, that's your budget worksheets that you're dealing with. Medium term, 3 to 5 years, that's the financial plan that we've been doing the last several years, that your next update will be out probably in a week or two. But then longer term, we'll talk about at least years 6 and 7 of that, because you really need to see, if legislation doesn't change, is what do you look like in 2031 and 2 when all of these are fully phased in. Now, that does put a little more work on you guys' plates, because don't be surprised if at some point it's like, well, what's your capital plan 6 years from now instead of just 5 years?
Has there been a historic pattern? I know this has, I guess we won't have a pattern a lot, but knowing the implications this caused to local city, county governments, to change or amend that, I guess we want in the next year or two. I'm guessing you're going to have, if I had to guess, benefits and stuff cut, where we're going to have people leaving, go to the private sector. So therefore, we can't fill those positions, and that see public safety or personnel deteriorate throughout the communities. They're going to have to change something. Is there a historic basis? You see that change at all? Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
I was going to say, what I see what Natalie's opinion is on that, then I'll give you mine.
I mean, the crystal ball is probably better than mine, but I think that they're not. I don't foresee them touching anything with SB1 next session. I think it will be the following session when it's budgetary year, and then they'll have a better forecast than what they had at the end of session this year. I mean, the forecast was not great. It was not at all what we had thought it would be. So those forecasts, again, will be different in 6 months. They're going to be different next year. So I think this will probably stay until 2 years from now. That's just
I don't disagree with that. I would say the most likely change and why I think they kicked it out to 2028 is I think they'll tweak the lit discussion. I mean, that's why they're giving themselves a couple of years, I think, to figure that out before it's enacted. I think there'll be some retroactive changes, just like there was with circuit breaker tax caps. If the impacts end up being worse and they start seeing a lot of pain locally, they'll start either tweaking some of this or more likely giving you guys what I call lifelines. Like, hey, this is oversimplifying. I'm not saying they'll do this, but okay, we see it's really is cutting you guys to the bone in some areas. Instead of a 1.2 cap on income tax, maybe it's a 1.4. Okay, you guys go make the decision. If you want more revenue, you vote on it and take the heat, but here's a way to get more revenue.
I think that's all very fair.
And that's why I mentioned it earlier. We have a couple of counties we started with to really, to Natalie's point of like the estimates weren't great. Like, keep in mind to actually see the impact of this, you have to look across, and in some cases cross counties, but take a self-contained county, take DeKalb County. You have to look at every property class in that. You have to know, the age. You saw the 65 and old. You have to, and that's all publicly, or that's all available through your county tax database. But you have to pull those hundreds of thousands of parcels of information, aggregate it, and then apply these shifts to it to get an accurate picture. And then you have to take into account with that, well, what happens if in 3 years the school does a referendum, or the school issues a under the controlled project threshold, a bond issue that tweaks that tax rate a little bit? What happens to our assessed value growth trends? We're, like I said, almost done with 2 counties that we beta tested. We built those models, and we're going to build them for all 92 counties once we beta test this. And then you'll have a working database that you can say, okay, what if we change these 6 assumptions? What does that do to us in 2031 or 2030 or 2029? I just went through that like that's some easy, like you throw it in Excel. I mean, this stuff is so big, like it crashes Excel and servers, and like that's why it's taking a while to build. But that's similar to what LSA, who does the impacts, they do, the similar thing. There's so many variables to this, though. I would echo what Natalie said. Like, I don't know that there's ever a great model. There's a working model, and it's based on how good are your underlying assumptions, right? It's no different than the whole federal bill that just got passed, right? There's some people say it's going to add trillions to the debt. Some people say it's going to be neutral. Well, what changes that? The underlying assumption that you're using. So it's how good are the underlying assumptions to that. I think we're well positioned, especially in communities we work very closely with, of making very, very good underlying assumptions, because we can take specifically what we've seen in your county, your area, when we work with the school, the town, the city, the county, all that information that we already know and understand. We know a lot of times when you're going to be going for debt at the county level or the school level. We can put that all into the model and really get spit out like a very good impact. We work with, Greg and team works with your RDC and the mayor, and we know economic development plans. So we don't just have to use let's just assume assessed values go up 3%. Well, if we know there's going to be a residential development of 500 homes at an assessed value of $250,000, well, that's a real assumption we can build in, phasing in over the next 3 years. And then you can build in trending and all the other stuff at the county level. So we'll get there. I think, Natalie, to your point, I feel very confident by later this year, we'll have some very, very good working models for clients. But I'll say, I don't think it's going to be perfect budget season time. Okay. Like it's going to be usable. I don't think you're going to have like the greatest thing. I think your data set, though, as you go into 27 budget, will be very clean, accurate. You'll be able to see a lot of different variables. That doesn't concern me totally, because remember, 26 is just first year phase in. Okay. 26. Yeah. You're going to have some impacts, but you're not going to have huge impacts in the LSA numbers, even, which take them with a grain of salt. And LSA even said that, year 3 is where you really start to see some jumps in the impacts. So you've got some time here to deal with this. And I think just like when Circuit Breaker came out, we scrambled states, everybody created all these models to estimate. And then after you got through the first round and actually started to see impacts, you were able to dial in the models very, very clean. I think we'll have that by the end of this year into next year. Slide 21, really just common sense stuff. You guys are already doing this. The purpose of today, understand the current situation, analyze your impacts, and mitigate financial disruption, and have your long-term plan. I'm trying to boil this down. The mayor, finance committee, everybody's getting a very good handle on this. I think the mayor knows the 5-year plan better than I do at this point. A lot of times, but understand the levers that move. Okay. It's only a handful on revenues. Lit is the number one, unless that changes. wheel tax, number 2. How you address the fire territory, probably number 3. Those are all revenue side things you guys are going to have to wrestle with. Expense side, where you guys deal with, it's, yeah, we can tighten our belt. Yeah, we can make tighter budgets, which you guys did great work this last year. But I really want you to think longer term. This is a 6-year phase in. Look at your personnel costs. Look at your succession planning. Where are there opportunities for you guys to tweak some things if you're going to be forced to save some money down the road? Capital plans. 22, this is generic snapshot, slide 22. This is part of what Natalie was referring to and what I keep saying, this legislative service agency. You know, they came out with estimated losses on the property tax side for 3 years. We're looking at, you got to take the whole 6 years into account. That's what we're building now too as well. But that basically, summing it up, that's the property tax side. So it's all those changes I showed you earlier in the deductions, credits, phases in. As that happens and pushes potentially more people to circuit breaker loss, that's where you're going to see this revenue shift. Okay. So keep in mind, I'm going to oversimplify. That's why what I was talking about earlier, Chief, you got to look at the whole county, because let's say the school does do a bond issue at the tax rate. And so that raises the tax rate. And let's say you guys do nothing on your side that changes anything with the tax rate. Well, without knowing that, that could by itself push more people above the circuit breaker because the tax rate went up a little bit. So let's say it took, let's say it took that $100,000 home and that person was paying $1,000 right now. They weren't at the cap, they were right at the cap. So there was no loss. Okay. Is that making sense so far? Let's say the school did that and it pushed them to $1,050 on their bill. Okay. And their assessed value didn't change. That $50 now they don't pay it. So it's not like you lost revenue. It's just you got no new revenue from that in the following year from the max levy growth quotient, right? But what starts to happen is how that $50 loss is shared is based on your piece of the overall levy for that property or the overall tax rate for that property. So simplistically, you're probably sharing about 1/3 of that loss. The county's probably about 1/3, the school's about 1/3, and the township and the other ones are just minimal in there. So even though you guys did nothing, it could result in actually shifting some revenue loss to you because you're such a big part of the taxpayer's revenue burden, and circuit breaker gets shared by levy allocation. I know that was totally wonky, but does that make sense? Like, you guys are a big tax driver, so you're also a big tax loser in the share of circuit breaker. Okay. And that's what this model, kind of the snapshot, shows here. But there, you know, this is for every county, every taxing unit in the state. I saw Greg, you joined on. I'm going to go to slide 23. This is just a summary. And Greg, do you want to just talk about the income tax side? I know they've all got handouts. So they probably can't see the screen, but just narratively walk them through this. Oh, we can't hear you. On the screen? Oh, I see it down at the bottom right. There you go. Now try it again, Greg.
Yes.
Yeah, we can. The other piece, Greg, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is if you look in the top right corner where the the total rate right now is 2.13. Simplistically, if the county adopted to their max 1.2 and the city adopts to their max 1.2, the county would probably be generating, we haven't done the analysis, but probably be generating a lot more revenue than they are currently. But your taxpayer in the city of Auburn would actually see an income tax increase than under this. Is that accurate? So that's why. So I think on slide 23, what this illustrates is what I was talking about earlier, where, again, oversimplifying, if you guys do 1.2, the county does 1.2, Auburn residents are going to feel a tax increase. Who made that tax increase, right? And that's why I think there has to be a coordinated effort between, well, what is the county going to do? Is there going to be a fire rate in there? Is there going to be the other things that Greg talked about? And getting to what is the prior rate, what is the new rate, and then how do you message that out to your taxpayers? I wish all 92 counties, everybody worked really, really well together, but you can see kind of where this could get messy in some areas if people aren't coordinating between the different municipalities. The other piece I would say, and Greg hit it, I just want to underscore, this data is not available right now. So we're making what I would say very, very good assumptions based on census level data and incomes at the county level and the population within Auburn. Okay. What this shows me though, because I've seen some that are dramatically less, so like going to have big cuts potentially to income tax. What this shows me is you guys are at least in the ballpark that you should be close to being able to keep yourself whole on income tax, but you're likely going to need the full rate to get there, or very close to the full rate. Okay. Trent.
I guess I'm following that we're gonna, if we adopt our 1.2 and the county does theirs, we're gonna see a little bit of an increase, which, is not all that good. But if we don't do it, we're gonna lose 5 point whatever million in income. So it's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion.
I think that's good. I mean, yeah, I'd say you guys have a choice, but you really don't have a choice on income tax if you're going to keep the same service levels that you have. And to that point too, again, we just analyzed the city of Auburn. We didn't look at the county-wide one, but if you guys going to 1.2 are showing potentially a little bit less, I'm guessing if the county went to the 1.2, they would actually see a revenue increase on their side. So that's where that coordination, does the county need a full 1.2 to generate the amount of revenue they're generating now? Or the county may say, yeah, well, we want a little bit more because we're losing on the property tax side too. Comes that whole PR issue then, like, how does that get messaged out to everyone? Okay. Slide 24, this talks a little bit about the business personal property tax. Again, this is not like a DeKalb County or Auburn assessed value. This is just one analysis that we did that took into account all of the potential changes in circuit breaker, or tax levels, the 1%, 2%, and 3%, the phasing in of the deductions, business personal property tax, so on and so forth, and shows potential reductions in the NAV. Again, this is example purposes, so we chose like a highly impacted one, but you can see what that does to the tax rate right in the middle there, 2.2 to 3.85, right, because of reductions in those assessed values. DeKalb County, Auburn, I don't expect to be like that. But then it also shows the income tax distribution side, where right now at a county lit rate of 1%, and then going to a municipal rate of 1.2%, the maximum, actually getting a lower income tax revenue to the city. Same thing you guys saw on the previous slide. Taking your maximum and potentially getting a little bit less revenue, even just based on how the mix of incomes are in the county. Slide 25, just a few more on the bullet points to the left. We already talked about wheel tax, utility folks in the audience. So you guys do have pretty healthy pilot payments already. So you guys aren't one of the communities that doesn't have pilot or has very minimal. So I don't know if that's another road we can even really go down at this point. One I didn't mention, food and beverage tax. Up to a 1% or a 1% food and beverage tax that a municipality can do. That does take special legislation. Now, there's a lot of communities, I think 30 some in the state now, that have that. You just have to get one of your reps to carry that through a bill for you. But that's another avenue where you're generating local revenues on your own. you can see the theme here. It's quantify your revenue loss, quantify what this means to you, quantify where can we make reductions to offset some of that. And then you start talking about, well, how do we offset the loss through revenue decisions that we control? Okay. And I kind of already, food and beverage was one I forgot to mention earlier that I would have on your radar.
I think Columbia's ready for that last question.
Yes. And you probably don't have it handy, Nicole. I can send after this, Natalie. I actually have a sheet that shows all the communities in Indiana that have it, and actually shows the revenue they generated. I think it's like 24 or 23 information, but I can, Nicole, will you make a note of that? I can send that sheet out to you guys. It's just put a note and remind me. We just did it for Valparaiso. We did an analysis of food and beverage, and we provided them like 30 different communities that already have it and the amount of revenue they're generating. Adam has that document. If just ping him and we'll send it out to him. Yep. I think you'll see that trend. I'll harken back one more time to like circuit breaker. I think you'll see the food and beverage and the wheel tax trend be similar to what we saw back then, where trash fees and hydrant rental or fire protection pre-2010, I would say, if not half, very close to half or more of communities paid for trash fees through their general fund. They didn't have a fee on the utility bill for trash. Right away, you saw many communities take that out of their general fund, so not be property tax supported anymore, and shift it to the utility bills, because then that freed up property tax. You saw the same thing with fire protection. 15, 20 years ago, many communities paid for fire protection, a payment to the water utility from the general fund. So it was paid from property taxes to the water utility, shifted that on to the water utility bills. And the water utility it's a extra fee on your water bill, and the money comes directly into water. Well, then that frees up the property tax dollars to stay in the general fund. Dramatic. I can probably count on two hands the amount of communities that still pay for trash out of their general fund now, 15 years later, and don't have fire protection. I think you're going to see a similar trend in things like wheel tax and food and beverage, where you're going to see the majority of communities a decade from now are going to have those. Um, 26, this is what you guys already do. This is that financial plan that goes out multiple years. I would say the one change that we'll talk about with you guys going forward is, well, we'll be into it next year when we do the update, but getting out to 2031 and 2032 when this is fully enacted. You'll also see, and I know the mayor hasn't even seen the update yet, but in your new one, the review I just went through, we show the shift of the income taxes, even though that likely will get tweaked. So we show basically all of that revenue coming into general starting in 2028. And then we show the spin down of your seated and public safety lit through that. You're going to have a couple of years where you'll have no revenue, but you need to spend those cash balances down. And then you'll have to be shifting all of that cost over to the general fund. So your general fund, if you just kept it that way, your general fund is going to look artificially really good in this financial plan in 28, 29, 30, because you're getting all the income tax into your general fund, but you're still spending out of public safety lit and seated because you have cash balances there. What we have to start talking through is, okay, 2 or 3 years after that, when all that cost comes back, what's the picture going to look like? So I don't want to put too much pressure. Like, you need to have great capital plans going out 6, 7, 8 years, but we need to at least have some radar stuff at that point, because you're going to want to start thinking out that at that position when the general fund is going to take on all these costs. But that's for another day in discussion. I know that was a ton. What questions does everybody have?
Yeah. You mentioned fees, trash, for all this. Have you ever thought thought, or maybe you've already done this in other communities, a comprehensive review of all fees that are charged building and planning. I can tell you that there's communities that charge a lot more for development than what the city of Auburn does, whether it's subdivision development, reviews, and all that. I would think that we're on the very low end, we're developer friendly, but I can tell you Fishers, those communities down there charge a lot more. We've looked into it. They charge a lot more than what we do for those type of things.
Yeah, it's a good question. Everybody heard that question Daryl had. Good question. Yes, we've done those for communities. We're getting that. I think we've got probably 3 or 4 in the pipeline right now that we're getting that same exact question for. What we typically have done in the past and are doing for these, we can make it as bespoke as you want, but the most logical and quickest way to do it is you choose between 4 and 7 peer communities. Like, we want to compare ourselves to it. And then we have a decent amount of data. We can say, like, here's kind of the averages we see. And then we just kind of show you a summary. Here's what you charge. Here's what your peer communities are charging. Some fees, some communities don't call them the same thing, or it's hard to crosswalk, but the vast, I'd say, 80% of it or so is applicable, and you can get this publicly available data. But I don't know if Auburn's low or not. I would say if you guys haven't adjusted your fees in a number of years, yeah, you're probably low, because many communities have been doing it the last 4 or 5 years.
That's similar to what we did with water late
Yep.
24. So
Yep.
we prepared that same report for us.
Yeah. And it's not to jump ahead, but you'll see this in this financial plan, Mayor, that I just reviewed, different but similar, like park program stuff. We looked at all that's a page in there now, what it's costing you to do the programs versus what you're charging, what you could charge, what it's the same thing here. We can do that for any. I would say it's a good, some of it you guys can probably do yourselves, on some of the simple ones, but if you want to take it on a larger scale basis, we can definitely help you and get you some peer community data.
I think too, Eric, and we probably discussed this individually, but the stormwater fee for the city of Auburn may be something we can do in comparison as well, just for our utility in general. It's kind of on the radar for a lot of communities, just because it's this infrastructure that's coming out of a fund that we don't necessarily always take into consideration where the money's going. So I think that's probably something we can maybe add on to, just so the council knows and can look at it as well.
Yeah, state average right now for stormwater's around $6 residential payer. And Todd's exactly right. Wastewater's paying for stormwater stuff. You probably have some stormwater coming out of some of your capital city side funds, creating a revenue stream that pays for all that, frees up that money for other needs. But again, it comes back to, it sits at this legislative body to make that decision and take those questions and feed comments. What else? Good questions. Well, I think every time I come, it's like everybody leaves in this somber mood, because so I want to end on a few high notes, and then we can talk a little bit about the budget process and timeline. And Nicole, can you pull up that timeline that we sent out a couple of weeks ago as well on the screen while I'm going through this? So a couple of things that I think separates or makes Auburn in good shape for this. One, you guys have very healthy cash balances. Okay. Now, some funds aren't as healthy as others, but overall, you're very healthy cash balance wise. That was one of the legislative talking points of all this, is looking out saying, well, wow, it looks like municipalities, schools, counties have a lot of money, right? Like, some of these hits should be absorbable. Okay. Now, they weren't talking about Auburn specifically, but you guys are on the high end of that. So you should be in good shape to absorb some of this. Okay. And that's why you guys are in a good position on that crisis planning side. Like, I don't think, Mayor, you have to have any knee-jerk reactions. Like, in next year's budget. Like, I think we use the same budgeting process. We plan on some of these first phase of revenue shortfalls, but it's not like you guys need to go out and cut 20 headcount or something like that to make sure you can balance your budget. You can rely on cash reserves if this ends up being worse than we planned for a couple of years. Okay, so that's item one that you should be confident about. Item two, you guys have been doing the 5-year plan for a number of years now. The mayor's very ingrained into it. You guys and your capital plans and the budget worksheets feeding into that. I would say you guys are in the higher percentage. You know, I'm making up a percentage, but I'd say you're in the top probably 10 to 15% of clients of department heads, administration, council plugged into the process. Like, I'm not saying you know every single line item, but you guys understand for the most part how this all works together, where you're a department in the general fund and you ask for more money. Well, that's coming from the bucket that all those departments share, right? There's a lot of communities don't even get that. They think, well, that's my money in the IT department, or that's my police money. Nope, it's one big bucket on the revenue side. You're departmentalized on the expense. Okay. Doing these plans for a number of years and understanding the mechanics, you're steps ahead of, again, oversimplifying. It's not this easy, but all we really have to do now is take that plan and overlay these revenue issues to it. Okay. It's going to change your plan, but your plan's already built and gets updated every year. Now it's just layering in some revenue hits to it. And then what I would say is kind of the third piece that sets you guys up well. And I'm not saying debt is a fix for this, but you guys are pretty debt light. Okay. It's not like you're carrying a heavy debt burden. You guys rely on property taxes to pay a lot of debt, anything like that, where some of these referendum and controlled project thresholds are going to impact you. So you guys have flexibility going forward where, remember what I said earlier, if you're tightening your belts, what are the two areas you're tightening it? It's the 100s and the 400s, right? It's the personnel and it's the capital. Part of that belt tightening may really be, okay, we can't, and I'm making this up, so this is not like Auburn specific, but we can't afford to do 3 or 4 new police vehicles every year anymore because of the public safety loss and general property tax. Like, that just isn't affordable. But what we can do is every 3 to 5 years, when we have a GO or we do some type of bond, we roll in, 8 new police vehicles or something like that into that property tax backed bond and take it out of our budget. Does that make sense? Like, those are the things you guys have some flexibility to do, but it's going to potentially change some of your process and be a little bit of a painful point here the next couple of years as you work through this. I just wanted to use you as an example so that.
I appreciate that. You notice, remember, he said that it's not always.
Can you blow that up a little bit, Nicole? I can narratively hit it. So, and again, this is always subject to change, but keep in mind the extra public hearing doesn't take effect till 29, so that's not in here. But where we're at right now in your budget calendar, the preparation phase. So that's the budget worksheets going out. This meeting today, your CIPs, those also, Brandy has those. We'll just break them up by department. That's why I showed you. You have all that data now. So your draft CIPs are pretty much done, and your budget worksheets are ready to be built. We're looking to hopefully get back, if you guys want to write this down, the week of August 4th, your budget worksheets. Now, I know that's a fairly quick turnaround, but keep in mind, and Mayor, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have already kind of all went through your capital with the mayor, so I don't think there's going to be any dramatic changes on the 400s. So we're really talking, 100s is personnel. That's pretty much set. And, as you go through what a personnel increase is going to be, you deal with Lori's office. It's really your 2s and 300s that you got to go through. Okay, so I don't think this is going to be a huge lift. Again, this is my plug. And I'll say that I heard this talking point a couple of different times of what is really over budgeting, resulting in a misconception that municipalities may have too much money, right? Because if you just go out and you just pull some random municipality, or even pull aggregate data, and you say, and because we do this for clients all the time, so I see it, so I know it's true. Where you say, hey, our budget was $20 million and we spent 15. And the year before, our budget was $19 million and we spent 15. And the year before, it was $18 million and we spent 13. if I don't know enough about how local budgeting works, I start to say, well, man, they don't spend all the money they're getting. Why do municipalities even need as much money as they're getting? When I think we all know at this point now, right, the budget isn't tied to the revenue side, but you can see how that somebody could make that assessment. So I really keep preaching tightening budgets. Like, I'm not trying to get you to spend your whole budget. I'm not trying to get Lori to do additional appropriations all day long, but you don't want to be sitting. It's not a good budget. It's not a good soundbite, and it's not a good picture to paint every year that you have these huge amounts left over in your budgets. Okay. Especially your 1s, 2s, and 300s. Like, you should be 95% or so of those budgets if they're truly accurate. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind. That's why we give you the 3 years of history in line by line in those worksheets. Take that into account. Okay. The review phase is kind of the next phase. So after we get all those budget worksheets back, Mayor, Lori, council reviewing them, we'll start feeding those into the overall financial plan. August 6th, there will be another, this is subject to change, by the way, the highlights. Somewhere in early August will be another finance committee. That's where, if you remember last year, and I don't even know if we'll need to be involved this year, we'll leave that up to the administration, but you guys go through your budget. Hey, this is why I need more in these line items. This is what I'm talking about. This is why my budget went up 5 or 10%. As you guys go through those Excel files, always ask us, for questions if some math doesn't make sense or it's kicking out something different. But if you get to the end of it, you're like, yeah, I have a 20% increase in my 200 level, supplies. I would fully expect you're going to have some questions from the administration and the finance committee, right? So that's that discussion point. After you guys turn those in, just going through the why behind it. And then early September, probably the final finance committee meeting, we're just tying it all together. Is there any major issues we see? At that point, we'll probably have some better scrub data on the property tax impacts we can roll in on top of it. But you should be done by early September. September 27th, that's Lori's deadline. October 7th for a public hearing. October 21st for the adoption and second reading. I think those are pretty solid now, Lori. Those real numbers at this point. I mean, we can tweak them. I just want to, just review this and make sure we're in good shape. And then all done by October 28th and submitted. So really, from you guys' side, early September, your budgets are basically done. I would work in there for Natalie, Mayor, et cetera. Probably we'll have a draft of the overall 5-year financial report here in the next week to 10 days, probably out to you guys. New this year, utility folks, your utility reports that we usually look at are done, other than just in a couple things on electric that I know we're going to talk about. And then AES, I think there's 1 or 2 questions maybe, and then we'll finalize yours. Water and sewer are done. You guys will get your reports, and the council will too, like you're used to getting, that show you all the good data. Because of all the SB1 interwovenness that we have now, in the big book you guys have seen in the past, that financial plan, there's going to be appendices for each utility that's summarized of those basically cash outlooks. Because what you're going to start seeing is, do we need to tweak pilot? Do we need to tweak cost share? So I want the council and the administration now to have it all in one spot, because you may have to make a decision on a utility that impacts the general fund and vice versa. So you'll still get all of your detail you guys rely on, or just be a summarized version in those. Like I said, first version, probably a week to 10 days. Then we'll update it before that third finance committee in early September with basically your quasi-final budgets, so everybody can see the multi-year plan based on the 26 budget. Any questions, comments, or concerns with that timeline? Too fast, not fast enough? Natalie, I know you saw it already in draft. Are you good with those?
I think we're in a great spot. This was super helpful, and I think it'll just keep plugging away as we want to.
Yep.
It's cumbersome, but we'll get there.
And again, just I've seen the draft of the financial plan. I think you guys are in good shape. You have some decent sized capital items that are still kind of like a TBD, like where are we going to fund it from? But none of those are really in 26. I would say the other big piece is taking IT into a general fund department. We're planning on that, and we've got most of the information to be able to give you guys the first run of that recommendation. Is that still what everybody's thinking, is centralizing that cost? Okay. That also should be in the next week to 10 days. I think we have a few pieces of information we still have to probably get from you, Lori, but we should be able to give you the first draft. That's going to be a little messy at first, just to be honest. And we'll want you guys all to look at that too. You guys remember this discussion from last year, taking it out of your individual budgets, putting it into general. The piece that's going to be hard this first year is like making sure we pulled everything out. So what we're expecting is we'll give you some guideline on some line items where we pulled IT stuff out, but you need to be pretty comfortable that like, hey, am I funding that, or is IT general fund funding that? So it's going to take some discussions with you guys in IT, as you work through your own individual budgets.
I was in an IoT meeting yesterday, specific to cybersecurity, but with IoT, and they did mention some of the granting opportunities that are coming up. That will be a touching point for grants, is that IT has its own budget within
Yeah.
the fund. So we're ahead of the curve here.
Perfect. All right. Is there anything else, Natalie, Mayor, Lori, that you wanted me to touch on?
We'll continue to work on the worksheets.
Brandy, are you going back to your office right after this? Nicole, can you call Brandy right after this and just work through, just so she can just send out those Excel files, like break them down for her. I need to break down the general fund into some individual files, and then it should be fine. Okay. I mean, it shouldn't take us, we just have to sort it differently, but okay.
Everybody good? Great meeting. Thank you.